For a long time, critics insisted that the earliest narratives of the Bible were nothing more than unfounded myths. However, modern excavations are revealing a very different picture. Beneath the soil of Israel, pieces of a long-buried puzzle have begun to emerge. Artifacts carrying names once dismissed as legend, secret wartime tunnels, and the precise locations of events many believed were impossible. What archaeology has uncovered beneath the dust of Jerusalem is steadily silencing skeptics. Prepare to examine physical evidence that cannot simply be ignored. If you believe history matters, stay with me, because what we're about to explore changes the conversation entirely. The seals of Hezekiah and Isaiah. What I'm about to show you is one of the most fascinating archaeological discoveries of the last decade. Two small clay objects unearthed during excavations in the Ophel area of Jerusalem, just south of the Temple Mount. These objects are known as bullae, clay seal impressions used in ancient times to authenticate official documents, much like a royal signature. In 2015, a team led by Israeli archaeologist Dr. Eilat Mazar made a discovery that captured worldwide attention. First, they uncovered definitive evidence of a biblical king. The inscription on the clay was clear and unmistakable, belonging to Hezekiah, son of Ahaz, king of Judah. That alone would be extraordinary. Hezekiah is one of the most significant kings described in the Bible, known for purifying the temple and placing his trust in God when Jerusalem was surrounded by the Assyrian army. Finding his personal seal confirms that he was not a literary invention, but a historical ruler who governed Jerusalem in the 8th century BC. But the real surprise lay just 3 meters away. In the same archaeological layer, in the same area associated with royal administration, archaeologists discovered a second seal. It was damaged, its edge broken, but one name remained legible: Yeshayahu, the Hebrew form of Isaiah. According to the biblical books of Kings and Chronicles, the prophet Isaiah served as the closest advisor to King Hezekiah. They faced war together, they prayed together, they lived and led during the same period. What are the statistical odds of finding a seal bearing the name Isaiah just 3 meters from the seal of King Hezekiah, inside an area restricted to royal officials? For Dr. Mazar and many historians, these two bullae provide powerful support for the biblical account of Hezekiah and Isaiah. It is almost as if we discovered their desks side by side. These two fragments of clay suggest that the relationship described in Scripture between the king and the prophet was not merely theological storytelling, but an administrative and historical reality. And if archaeology can confirm the existence of these two towering figures of the Old Testament with such precision, what about the sacred texts associated with their era? Did those writings survive the passage of time? That question leads us to the next extraordinary discovery. The Dead Sea Scrolls. The year is 1947. The setting is the Judean desert, one of the driest and most unforgiving landscapes on earth. A young Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Edad-Dib is searching for a lost goat. He notices a cave high on a cliff. To check whether the animal might be inside, he does what any of us might do. He picks up a stone and throws it into the darkness. But instead of hearing a goat bleat, he hears something unexpected: the sound of pottery shattering. That single sound would forever change the course of biblical archaeology. The shepherd climbs into the cave and discovers ancient clay jars. Inside them there is no gold, no jewelry, only aged leather scrolls covered in dust and written in an unfamiliar script. They were the Dead Sea Scrolls. To understand the magnitude of this discovery, consider what was at stake. Until that moment, the oldest complete Hebrew manuscripts of the Old Testament dated to around AD 1000. That meant there was a gap of roughly 1,000 years between the time the biblical texts were originally written and the earliest surviving copies available to scholars. The Dead Sea Scrolls would close that gap in a way no one expected. There was a 1,000-year gap between the time of Jesus and the oldest complete Hebrew Bible manuscript we possessed. For centuries, critics and skeptics argued that the Bible was like a broken game of telephone. They claimed that after a millennium of manual copying, the original text had been altered, edited, and manipulated. According to this argument, the Bible we read today had little to do with what the prophets originally wrote, but the discovery made by that Bedouin shepherd dramatically shifted the conversation. When scholars carefully unrolled those ancient scrolls, They realized they were about 1,000 years older than any biblical manuscript previously known. The text dated from the 3rd century BC to the 1st century AD, from the time of Jesus and even earlier. And here is the part that truly stands out. Among the nearly 1,000 texts discovered in the caves of Qumran was the great Isaiah scroll. Remember the prophet Isaiah we discussed earlier? His entire book was there, complete, with all 66 chapters. When experts compared that 2,000-year-old manuscript to the Bible you may have at home today, the similarity was striking. The text was virtually identical. The only differences were minor grammatical variations, such as a single letter change or a spelling variation, that did not affect the meaning of the message in any meaningful way. This provided strong evidence that Jewish scribes transmitted the biblical text with extraordinary precision, preserving each word across the centuries. The broken telephone theory that skeptics repeated simply did not hold up under scrutiny. The shepherd who first found the scrolls sold them for just a few dollars to a shoemaker in Bethlehem, unaware that he had stumbled upon one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. Today, those manuscripts are considered priceless. They gave scholars confidence that the biblical text had been transmitted faithfully. Yet even with the reliability of the text strengthened, a major historical question remained. The Bible describes a powerful kingdom established by King David. However, for many years, archaeologists could not find a single inscription bearing his name. Critics argued that David never existed, that he was merely a legendary figure created to give Israel a heroic national origin. But the answer was buried beneath the soil of northern Israel, waiting to be uncovered. The Tel Dan Stele. For decades, a shadow lingered over the historical credibility of the biblical narrative. That shadow centered on one man, King David. You likely know the story, the shepherd boy who defeated Goliath, the musician who soothed Saul, the warrior who united the tribes of Israel. David is central to biblical history. Without David, there is no Jerusalem as a political capital, no collection of psalms attributed to him, and the theological lineage of the Messiah becomes far more difficult to trace. Yet until the 1990s, many archaeologists considered David a myth. Critics stated plainly that David never existed. They argued he was a legendary figure created centuries later to give Israel a glorious founding narrative. There was not a single coin, not a single brick, not a single external inscription mentioning the name David outside the Bible. They asked, how could there have been a great empire if we cannot even find the founder's name? Everything changed in 1993. In the far north of Israel, at an archaeological site called Tel Dan, an excavation team led by Professor Avraham Baran was wrapping up their work for the day. As the late afternoon sunlight struck a piece of black basalt stone that had been reused in an ancient wall, something caught their attention. The stone was not ordinary rubble. It bore markings, letters. After brushing away the dust, the team realized they were holding a fragment of a victory stele, an inscribed monument commemorating a military triumph. What they were about to read would alter the debate forever. It was a monument erected by an enemy king, Hazael, king of Damascus, boasting of his military victories. The inscription, written in ancient Aramaic, listed the rulers he had defeated in battle, and there, in line 9, appeared the phrase that permanently altered the debate, King of the House of David. The impact was immediate. For the first time in history outside of the Bible, the name David appeared in an independent source, and it was not found in a religious text written by Israelites. It appeared in the record of an enemy. Think about that for a moment. An enemy king does not boast about defeating the dynasty of a fictional character. He boasts about conquering the dynasty of a real, powerful ruler, someone whose name carried enough weight to be recognized by surrounding nations. The Tel Dan Stele demonstrated that David was not a myth. He was a historical king, flesh and blood, the founder of a dynasty internationally recognized by the 9th century BC. And if David was real, then the city he conquered, Jerusalem, should also bear tangible evidence of his dynasty. One of his descendants, King Hezekiah, the same king whose seal we examined earlier, left behind a mark so impressive that you can literally step inside it and walk through history. Hezekiah's Tunnel. This is one of the most remarkable engineering achievements of the ancient world, a feat that still leaves visitors astonished today. Imagine the situation. You are the king of Jerusalem in the 8th century BC. The Assyrian army, the most ruthless and efficient war machine of its time, is advancing toward you. Surrounding cities have already been destroyed. A siege is imminent. Your city walls are strong, but you have a critical vulnerability. Jerusalem's primary water source, the Gihon Spring, lies outside the city walls in the Kidron Valley. If the Assyrians capture or block the spring, the city will die of thirst within days. What does King Hezekiah do? He makes a bold decision: bring the water inside the walls. But this was not a simple trench. Trench. It required carving 533 meters, approximately 1,750 feet, through solid limestone beneath the city of David, and it had to be completed quickly before the enemy arrived. To accelerate the process, 2 teams of workers began digging simultaneously, one starting at the Gihon Spring outside the city, and the other beginning at the Pool of Siloam inside the walls. They had to meet in the middle. No GPS, no modern surveying instruments, only intuition, sound, and careful alignment through rock. It sounds almost impossible. Today, visitors can walk through that tunnel in Jerusalem. The cold water of the Gihon Spring still flows through it, often reaching knee level. As you move forward with a flashlight, feeling the damp, uneven limestone walls, you can see the chisel marks carved into the stone. And at the precise point where the 2 teams met, something remarkable happens. The ceiling height shifts slightly, and the tool marks change direction. It is physical evidence of that desperate convergence. They succeeded. Water flowed into Jerusalem, filling the Pool of Siloam, and the city survived the Assyrian siege under King Sennacherib, exactly as described in the books of 2 Kings and 2 Chronicles. To commemorate the achievement, an inscription was carved into the tunnel wall, known today as the Siloam Inscription. It celebrates the moment when the 2 teams heard each other's voices through the rock and their picks finally met. The text describes the water flowing for 1,200 cubits from the spring to the reservoir. Discovered in 1880, the Siloam inscription remains one of the oldest known Hebrew inscriptions ever found. Now let us leave the darkness of the tunnel and move forward in time. We step beyond the kings of the Old Testament and enter one of the most dramatic periods in human history, the week of Christ's Passion, the Ossuary of Caiaphas. We now arrive at one of the most tense and decisive moments in the biblical narrative, the trial of Jesus. For centuries, some skeptical historians viewed the Passion accounts as dramatic literature. They argued that figures such as the high priest Caiaphas were literary antagonists, characters created by the gospel writers to personify opposition to Jesus. According to that theory, perhaps such individuals never existed in the form or authority described. That theory collapsed in November 1990, unexpectedly. Construction workers were expanding a road in a park south of Jerusalem's Old City when a bulldozer blade struck something hollow. The roof of an ancient burial cave collapsed. When archaeologists from the Israel Antiquities Authority arrived, they realized they had uncovered a 1st century burial chamber, the very period of Jesus. Inside were 12 limestone boxes known as ossuaries. To understand their significance, it helps to know 1st century Jewish burial customs. Bodies were placed in caves for about a year. After decomposition, the bones were gathered and placed into stone boxes to conserve space. Most of the ossuaries found in the cave were plain and undecorated, but one stood out. It was elaborately carved, decorated with delicate floral patterns and rosettes, indicating it belonged to someone wealthy and influential. Then archaeologists saw the inscription etched along its side. In Aramaic, it read, "Joseph, son of Caiaphas." This matches precisely with historical records. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, writing in the 1st century, confirms that the full name of the high priest who presided over the trial of Jesus was Joseph Caiaphas. Archaeologists were now standing in the burial chamber of the family of the man who presided over the Sanhedrin during the trial of Christ. The night Jesus was arrested, according to the Gospel of Matthew, the high priest tore his own garments and accused him of blasphemy. Inside that ornate ossuary, scientists found the bones of a man approximately 60 years old. The discovery of the Caiaphas ossuary brought a stark historical reality to the Passion narrative. This is not legend. It is not allegory. It is a historical event involving real individuals, men whose burial places we can examine today. But why was Caiaphas so threatened by Jesus? Because Jesus was not merely a preacher. He performed acts that challenged both logic and the authority of the temple establishment. One of his most well-known miracles took place in a public location that remained hidden for nearly 2,000 years, until another unexpected discovery revealed the setting: the Pool of Siloam. What unsettled the religious elite was not only what Jesus said, it was what he did. The crowds followed him because they witnessed the impossible unfolding before their eyes. One of the most striking miracles described in Scripture is the healing of the man born blind, recorded in John chapter 9. The scene is vivid. Jesus makes mud with the soil, places it on the blind man's eyes, and gives him a specific instruction: "Go, wash in the Pool of Siloam." The man obeys and returns seeing. For centuries, some scholars argued that the Gospel of John, written later than the Synoptic Gospels, lacked precise historical detail. They suggested that Siloam might have been symbolic, a theological metaphor, or perhaps merely a small Byzantine-era pool that tourists visited in modern times. They doubted that a large, monumental public pool bearing that name existed during the time of Jesus. They were mistaken. Once again, the truth emerged through an ordinary construction accident. In 2004, municipal workers in Jerusalem were repairing a broken sewage pipe in the southern area of the city of David. As they dug, their equipment struck something solid. It was not soil, it was not modern infrastructure. It was a set of ancient stone steps, wishfagid and remarkably well preserved. Archaeologists Eli Shukron and Ronnie Reich were immediately called to the scene. As they cleared away mud and debris, what emerged was extraordinary. They had not uncovered a small basin. They had discovered a massive structure, approximately the size of 2 Olympic swimming pools, surrounded by broad stone steps descending on multiple sides. To determine the date of the structure, archaeologists relied on a reliable method: coins embedded in the original plaster lining of the pool. They found coins from the time of Alexander Jannaeus, 1st century BC, and coins from the Jewish revolt of AD 66 to 70. This evidence demonstrated that the pool was fully operational during the exact period when Jesus walked the streets of Jerusalem. The discovery reshaped the context of the miracle. Siloam was not an obscure location. It was a major ritual purification pool, a mikveh, where thousands of pilgrims cleansed themselves before ascending to the temple. When Jesus sent the blind man to wash there, he was not hiding the miracle. He was directing him to the most public location in the city. The healing would be seen. It would be undeniable. Today, visitors can descend to the site and sit on the same stone steps where that man may have washed his face 2,000 years ago. The setting described in the Gospel remains physically accessible, a direct connection between text and terrain. But if archaeology confirmed the place of healing in the burial of the high priest who judged him, one location remains to complete the narrative: the end of the road, the place where everything seemed to end and where, according to Christian belief, everything truly began: the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. All lines of evidence converged toward a single geographic point, the location where history itself was divided. The site, traditionally identified as the crucifixion and burial place of Jesus, stands within the walls of Jerusalem today, known as the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the place of the crucifixion and the resurrection. If you visit Jerusalem today, you may feel confused at first. You won't find a green hill under an open sky like the scenes portrayed in movies. Instead, you'll enter an ancient, dimly lit structure filled with incense, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. For centuries, many questioned it. How could this be the place? Skeptics asked. It's in the middle of the old city. It seemed impossible that this dense complex of stone walls could be Golgotha. But archaeology is not concerned with how a site looks today. It focuses on what lies beneath the surface. And what lies beneath the Church of the Holy Sepulchre tells a story that aligns precisely with the events of Good Friday. Excavations have confirmed that in the 1st century, this area was an abandoned quarry that had later been converted into a garden and burial site. Most importantly, at that time it was located outside the city walls, exactly as described in Hebrews chapter 13, which states that Jesus suffered outside the gate. One of the strongest historical confirmations came not from a Christian source, but from an opponent of Christianity. In AD 135, the Roman Emperor Hadrian sought to erase the memory of Jesus. He knew that early Christians were gathering at that garden tomb to pray. So he ordered the site to be buried and constructed a pagan temple dedicated to the goddess Venus directly over it. Ironically, in attempting to suppress the location, Hadrian permanently marked it for future generations. Nearly 2 centuries later, after Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity, he ordered the demolition of the Temple of Venus. Beneath the Roman debris, the tomb was found, preserved under the very structure intended to conceal it. In 2016, an event occurred that drew global attention. For the first time in centuries, scientists, working in collaboration with National Geographic, were granted permission to open the edicule, the small chapel that encloses the tomb. They removed the marble slab that had long covered the limestone burial bench where Jesus' body is believed to have been laid. What they found was remarkable. Beneath layers of later construction, they uncovered the original limestone bedrock intact. The mortar securing the marble covering was dated to AD 345, confirming that this site has been continuously venerated since the early Roman Christian period. Archaeology can only go so far. It has shown us the setting. It has demonstrated that David was a historical king, that Hezekiah constructed his tunnel, that Caiaphas presided as high priest, and that the Pool of Siloam existed during the time of Jesus. It has confirmed that the tomb is from the 1st century and that it stands empty. If the Bible proves accurate in the historical details we can excavate, measure, and verify, then it at least deserves serious consideration in the matters that lie beyond physical evidence. Thank you for watching all the way through. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.